Hey, paisans, the time has come. On the air since 2009, the independently produced, non-FCC compliant champ of video game talk podcasting. Here comes Tiger Claw Radio. Here's your host, Critical Failure.
Morning, everybody. Is that cutting through? Hey, it's a little loud in here, but that's okay. You're listening to Tiger Claw Radio. I am your host, Critical Failure. We're going to talk some video games, going to talk some NES, going to listen to some chiptunes, going to have a good time. We're also going to finish up our list of worthwhile MS-DOS games. Started that a few weeks ago, took a break last week. We're going to finish it up this week. Thanks for joining us. Let's kick things off with some kind of chiptune, but stay tuned. This one is Zan Zawavia. And the name of the song is Bull Rush. It's a bit on the lengthy side, but it's kind of abstract, kind of unique. Not any other song like it. Take a listen. Welcome back to the studio. You're listening to Tiger Claw Radio. Before we get to the worthwhile DOS games, let's play a quick piece that I recorded just the other day, right here in the studio. Go in there now. You're listening to TCR. This is being recorded on Monday. It's President's Day today. I had some time off of work. And over the last week or so, a couple of things happened. Now, you might remember I was talking about the Commodore 64, so I played some C64, which was fun. But I drifted back to my Nintendo. Now, I haven't been into the NES in quite some time. And I think for the big thing was my phone. I hooked up my phone to my laptop dock, and I was able to use it like a desktop PC. And have a station all set up for it, which is pretty sweet. So I had an NES emulator set up, and I ran Punch-Out on it just to see, what it was like. Punch-Out is like the litmus test for emulation, in my opinion, because when I play Punch-Out on authentic hardware, I can get pretty far. I was never one of these guys who could beat the game, but I don't know. I should be able to get, even after not picking it up for a long time, I should be able to make decent progress. But if you're playing it on an emulator, I can get as far as the Great Tiger. And the Great Tiger has a move where he, does his Mirage attack where he spins around in the ring in a circle and hits you 1, 2, 3. Now the trick to get around it is you hold down, you block, and every time he hits you, it drops your guard. So you got to make sure and block again immediately after. The timing for that, if there's any input lag, and I'm talking about a non-noticeable amount of input lag, like individual frames, okay? If there is any input lag, I'll make it all the way up to that guy, and I won't be able to beat him, which is what happened. So that was like a harsh reminder. It's like, yeah, okay, this is still not, there always will be this little tiny difference between this and the authentic hardware, which is why, the real reason why NESs and stuff are, even amidst emulation, are still worth owning. So that was a thing. I played that for a while, and that was sort of like a harsh wake-up call. But I played a little bit more Solar Striker on RetroArch, which was a good time, back on Steam. Great Game Boy game, from the gray card Game Boy era. It was kind of fun. I got to sit with my daughter, and she started playing through Pokemon Sapphire, which was great because she's just starting her reading. So I was able to sit with her, and she's big into Pokemon, so she was able to have a good time and practice the old reading skills, which was great. What else did I get into? I feel like there's something real big that I was missing that I played a ton of in the last week or so. Oh yeah, of course, there was Akari Warriors 2, which I sat down with for a while. You may have seen that video this past week. Weird game that has a very distinct memory baked into my brain of the video game rental days. Not a good game at all, but I only really remember ever renting that game, and I also remember renting Bart vs. the Space Mutants. I know we rented other games than that, but those are the only NES games I remember renting. Those, and then I think in the PlayStation era, we rented Metal Gear Solid once, and then it didn't work. That's the extent of it. So that's been fun, man. Just going back to revisit the old NES just a wee bit. There's still magic there. Sometimes when I think about the NES, I feel like a lot of the fun has been sort of taken away by terrible YouTube shows, myself included. But actually going back to play the games, not just read about them, not just see the screenshots or whatever, but just to really play them and get my hands on them and touch them again. There is fun to be had there, for sure, in a big way. Most of the games I played apart from that were really just sort of checking out what else I had saved in my emulator. Now, looking back at my history, I also played Mech Warrior for the Super Nintendo, which I remember Mech Warrior 2 for the PlayStation very fondly, but I had never really sat down with the original Mech Warrior, especially not the Super Nintendo version. But I gave it a shot, and I did a few missions, and it took a little bit to get going because you have to know to equip your mech and all that stuff. But I actually enjoyed it much more than I thought I was going to. Don't get me wrong, it's a really cumbersome game, but I don't know. I could have seen really being into it had I come across it, when we actually had a Super Nintendo and I had the patience and the time to play a game like that. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. It's pretty, let's be honest, pretty simple mech combat. But also, for the Super Nintendo, visually impressive. It was, it was 3D. I want to avoid saying faux 3D, but it's like early 3D graphics. Externally, all you're seeing is a single horizontal plane that's textured, and that's the environment. Very similar to like the original Super Mario Kart. But I don't know. It was a good time. They did the mech setting very, very well. Oh, by the way, let's shift gears for a second. I want to talk about Jetpack, which is a game we talked about in recent past. It's an MS-DOS game, side-scroller, or platforming anyway. It exists on a single screen, so I don't know if I'd call it a side-scroller. But anyway, let's get to the point. So, I got some levels for the Christmas version of Jetpack from good old Hemrock, and I found a Jetpack Discord, believe it or not, that is related to that game. And it's, very slow moving. It's not like a swinging community, but there's a few people that hey, I made levels, whatever, I post them up here. And apparently, so here's the deal. There was a Jetpack 2, and it came out, it was powered by Adobe Flash. So it was web-based, and you can't, it appears to have been down. But recently, I say it's not that recent, but it was halfway through 2020, so we'll say 6-7 months ago, not that recent. Apparently they made a downloadable version of Jetpack 2, or the newer Jetpack. It says you have to have a license, so I don't think it's not freeware like the original Jetpack is, but that is a thing. I found it on the Jetpack Discord, so I have to sign up for that site, but hopefully if it's still, something you can pay for, then I'll pony up some cash and pick it up, because it looks like fun. Yeah, that's notable updates. Get the picture. Number 13 can be completed without dying. Candy Factory has been fixed. Vertical challenge much improved. Real updates to the game coming out in the middle of last year. So this looks like this must be the official related Jetpack Discord. I asked them there if you could purchase the full version of the Christmas Jetpack, and they were like, no full version ever existed. Which is kind of hilarious. All right, I think that's all I got for now. We'll finish up the recording tomorrow. I'll see you back in the studio. Back again in the studio, and yes, indeed, the Litmus Test is Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. And it kills me because since that happened, I'm dying to hook up my old NES and actually play Mike Tyson's Punch-Out legit. I'm going to make this happen. This has got to happen. In the meantime, let's go way back to the 8-Bit Collective days. Now, we played J. Arthur Keen's Here on the Air a number of times. His later albums, where he drifted away from chiptunes, and he registered them so you'd get copyright claimed if you played one. Here's one of his before he put out any albums. This is J. Arthur Keen's. Actually, it's Sievert featuring J. Arthur Keen. Sievert was a ska guy at the time who was into chiptunes, and J. Arthur was like the biggest name in chiptune at the time. And this is a song they made together. And as far as I know, you're not going to find this on an album anywhere. This is Laser Time from Sievert. You're listening to TCR. Back again in the studio. Quick thanks to the sponsors. This is a Patreon-sponsored program. This is the part of the show where I lift my cup to those who are keeping the lights on in this time when we've moved to Wednesday, and production is getting difficult, and everyone's views are down, and the world is changing, and it's just a weird time. So I like to read their names off in a hall of distinguished gentlemen, and they are Hemrock, Emerald Rangers, Tecmo Balls, Dorobka, and Eric Controller. Thank you guys so much for keeping the show afloat, and I hope you're enjoying the party. My apologies again to Paul Messier, who created the board game Vanguards of the Lost Lands. Still doing the best I can to make this happen, and the next time I see you online when I can talk, we're going to record a bit. So hopefully that'll be next week. For now, let's go to the worthwhile DOS games infographic that has been circulating the internet for years and years and years. Now, the last couple times we went through this list, the games were great, and that made it worth looking at. The writing in the blurbs is less than stellar, but that didn't matter because they're games for the most part I knew, I played, and it's fun to talk about them again. So we cut it down to, there's 10 left. So we're going to do the last 10 in alphabetical order of worthwhile DOS games. Now, if you don't have any connection to DOS and have been considering it, you can get yourself a copy of DOSBox for free. And the vast majority of these you can find just around the internet. There are a few exceptions, and it's been less true since GOG.com has been around. But most of these you can just get. You can just search and find yourself a copy. So at the top of the list we have UFO Enemy Unknown. And this is an interesting one because the name is different depending on the region that you're in the world. The UK and just Europe in general had a completely different name. We had XCOM, UFO Defense, and they had UFO Enemy Unknown. So that tells me this is a European writer. It's listed as 1993, isometric, turn-based shooting, not shooting, but turn-based strategy. I like this game. XCOM is one of the games that's like, it had a huge cult following, and there was like a couple of games early in the series. They had this game, and then there was a sequel like the very next year, and then there was like a true sequel a year later or something like that. But then we had nothing for like decades, a couple of decades. The only games that carried the name XCOM, and there were a couple, were nothing like this original game. Like there was like a third-person shooting game that was called XCOM. It was like XCOM. What was it? It was like the fifth one in the series, and there was like a flight game or something. I don't know. There's a couple of weird games that were considered canon to XCOM, but were not like this. This is the original. Now, when you think tactics games, turn-based strategy, like tactics combat, there's really two games that come to mind as the gold standard for those types of games. One is Final Fantasy Tactics. The other is the original XCOM, UFO Defense. Punishingly difficult. I would say the amount of research and like development and stuff you have to do in between missions is very large when you compare it to the rate at which people can die playing XCOM. So clearly a game that's designed to be played around a save scumming strategy. But I like it. It's worth playing. Takes a long time to play. This is not a quick game. When we finally did get XCOM games, true remake / sequel / modernization, whatever you want to know, they had their work cut out for them, modernizing the interface. This is a game that people rightly complain about when they're used to modern games and they go back to play the original XCOM. It's tough to get around in. I personally don't find it that difficult because I've sat down with it a bunch, but that is a common complaint that I totally get. So that is XCOM. Coming up next, we've got Ultima Underworld, The Stygian Abyss, and Labyrinth of Worlds. This is Ultima Underworld as a series. They kind of crammed them into two. Now this one has a release date of 1992. Now hang on a second, because this is not my original copy, but this was a repurchase of the copy that I had. A story I tell many times here on Tiger Claw Radio. I had a collection of big box games in the early 2000s. right around 2000, my mom threw them all out when I was 17 and I moved out of my house. One of the games that I had was a game called Ultimate RPG Archives. I've since rebought it. It had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It was like 12 big box games in one. Yeah! Which, it was like $30. And all the games that are on this list, even at the time, were old. So to put it in perspective, that was, we'll say 2000, and Ultima Underworld is marked as 1992, so it was an 8-year-old game when I bought it. But along with this group of games was a great big phone book manual with all of the complete manuals pasted together in a single volume in hard copy. So I have the... I don't know if I could call this the original Ultima Underworld manual, but I do have it for Ultima Underworld 1 and 2. And this was how I first experienced the game. So in that time frame, let's see, what was my interest? I bought this box because it had a wizardry game in it, and I was big into wizardry. I hadn't played the original Ultima series yet, and that didn't really come till later. Like, I knew what Ultima was, but I was not an Ultima fan. But the fact that it had smooth, non-grid-based travel kind of blew my mind a little bit, just because I was used to games like Wizardry, and things like that, where you moved on a grid, right? I think the one that this came with, Wizardry Gold, you still move on a grid in that game. Not in Ultima Underworld. Controls are a little wonky. It was an early kind of game like that, but they did okay. Next, we're going to push through this next one, because the next one is Ultima 7 Complete Edition. Now, I've never been big into the Ultima series, and I know it's put right up there with like the classic PC games. The gentlemen of my ilk tend to hold Ultima in high regard. I really only ever played the first one, and that was really only for like a short period of time. I remember some of these later Ultima games being on the shelves when I was buying PC games, but I never got around to picking them up, and my big box PC game was largely trashed anyway, so it is what it is. I will say, though, at the time there was an Ultima like complete box set, that, much like this RPG Archives thing, where it had like a single CD that had like all of the PC Ultima games at the time on it. And I didn't buy it. It was really cheap at the time, too. It was like $20. But I could pick it up and feel that there was no big-time manual in it. And hey, man, my standard at the time was, if you're going to sell me a box set that's got, 6 old PC games in it or whatever it is, there should be a great big manual. Because that's what I had seen from other companies. Interplay has one with this Ultima RPG Archives. I got a Wizardry Archives box that also had one just of all the old Wizardry games. King's Quest, Space Quest, Police Quest. I had all of those in big box format, and their collections came with gigantic phone book manuals, so you could have the manual to all the games. I just thought that's how these collections went. So seeing the Ultima one not have one made me pass on it. I don't know if it's big money now, but if you want to get that box set, it's not a cheap one. Last time I looked it up, it was like, I don't know, $50 or something like that. $50 for games you can go pick up on GOG for, pennies on the dollar at any given sale. But that's Ultima, and that's why when I see it on a list like now, I tip my hat to it because I know it's part of the era, but I never really got into it hard. Next we have Wacky Wheels, 1994. So this is one that was like, a game is popular on consoles. We don't have one on the computer. Apogee 3D Realms took a shot at remaking Mario Kart on the computer. 1994, a little wonky. I really liked it. Frame rate is really low, which makes it kind of weird to go back to now. But the biggest problem I have with Wacky Wheels is that, and this is kind of a weird thing to think of as a problem, but Wacky Wheels has native gamepad support. So when I put it on, when I play it on Steam, I go to open up Joy to Key so I can bind my own, joypad keys, joystick keys, because I want to play with a controller, and it's very difficult because my controller is auto-bound to whatever their format is. It is playable, but I can't remap the controls for that reason, unless I figured out some way to disable the joystick in the settings. Actually, I could probably do that. I kind of want to try that again now. But that's Wacky Wheels. It has the split screen gameplay that Mario Kart was really famous for at the time, and which fit right in on a computer where, in 1994, it was not the industry standard to be able to connect to the internet and play with random people. How many we got left? 5. Yeah, we're halfway through. Next is 1988's Wasteland. Another one that has its place in history that I never really got into, and this one is on my RPG Archives box set. But in order to look around, you would have to open the manual and read a passage out of it, which in my youth I could not get down with, especially since Bard's Tale came on the same box set, and that was my introduction to Bard's Tale, and I loved Bard's Tale. It was so good. Coming up next, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, 1985. It's another series that some people remember fondly. My wife even has one of the Where in the X is Carmen Sandiego, like CD-ROMs she left over from like her youth. But I just never took the plunge. I even have one of those games for the Sega Genesis that I think one of you sent me. I think Sendu might have sent that to me. Correct me if I'm wrong. No disrespect if it came from somebody else, but I know it was from a listener. 3 left, and the remaining 3 are all hugely important games in my opinion. So it's a strong 3 to leave on, even though it was in alphabetical order and they just kind of fell this way. The first one is the entire Wing Commander series, which is weird. It's listed as Wing Commander 1 through 6, and plus Wing Commander Privateer. That's most of the Wing Commander series. So Academy is left out, and Privateer 2 is left out, I guess. Whatever. Let's read what it says, because I've been kind of skipping the blurbs that they have written up until this point. But this is Wing Commander, so I want to see what they came up with. Wing Commander is one of those series that will forever grace halls of fame and all-time best lists. It is one of the rare cases in which everything comes together in sync, and the result just becomes a massive breakthrough in technology, gameplay, and storytelling. A title that has spawned an entire cloned series. Yep, sure is great because it's good. Good game though, man. Space combat, somewhat of a non-linear style of gameplay, because you have to complete the mission, but you can kind of plan your route through the jumps yourself. So you can play it linearly if you want, but you have control to shift that line. I don't know. I wouldn't exactly call it a sandbox game because you are given a clear direction, and you do have to go out of your way. It's not like Grand Theft Auto where you have to focus and make sure you're driving in the right place in order to follow the mission. No, this isn't like that. You just make the jump, and it'll jump you to the next spot. That's Wing Commander. Personally important because we had a big box copy of Wing Commander 2 when I was a kid, and I'm trying to think of another way to describe it. That's why it's personally important, but culturally and technologically important because I think it was the pinnacle of spaceflight at the time. Now, it's been surpassed since then, but I remember in the Super Nintendo era clearly thinking there will not be ever any flight or spaceflight game to surpass Wing Commander. And there has, but that possession of an era has cemented it in my Hall of Fame, as is Wing Commander 2. We didn't have the speech pack when I was young because we had a PC speaker. Actually, we did have the speech pack, but there was no reason to install it because the computer that we ran it on had a PC speaker, didn't have a sound card. So, the bleeps and bloops, whatever. Kind of weird. It's kind of weird to think that because of that, because we had a PC speaker, I can reinstall Wing Commander 2, and I can play it, and it'll still be different than when I was a kid, just because of the sound, just because I was lacking the sound. That's one of those things that I could fix in the settings, I'm sure, but just no reason to, Next is Wolfenstein 3D. Well documented in its place in history when it comes to first-person shooters. But this one, I think, is recently important to me because I never beat it as a kid. I could beat the first episode over and over again, but I would get stuck hopelessly, and I went back and completed the entire game, like just this past year, and it was great. It was great. There's some problems, like they use mazes in the levels, which can get really irritating. There's certain places where you have to find the secret to proceed to the next level. And of course, the only way to find the secret is to check every single tile of every single wall. But if you get the EC Wolf source port, you can actually use a mini-map and play that way. And that makes it actually possible to win. Fun game. It's fun. The shooting, you can walk super fast. It's fun. It's a good time. That's another one that I had that big box. $5, man. Off the shelf. Big box CD-ROM edition. My mom threw it out. Thankfully, I still have the CD. I'm looking at it up on the shelf right now. And I know I've gone through this whole bit on the show before, but in the last couple weeks, I've been really thinking about doing this. I've had this series idea kicking around in my head for a long time. It's like a low-effort kind of thing I could do just to make some fun videos. Specifically looking at the CDs, CD-ROMs of old games. Not necessarily the game itself, but what did the company decide to put on this CD-ROM? What demos are there? What catalog information is there? What README information is there? And what advertisements are there? Because I had a couple of games that I looked at, and they had like trial versions of AOL or something on them. And I don't know. I'm interested to look now. We'll see. Especially since I had to get rid of some of my CDs. I had some CDs that had no value financially and also didn't really have any value personally, and nobody wanted them. So it's like, all right, they gotta go. Thankfully, I was able to find a used bookstore that would take them, so they didn't go in the trash. But I did have to thin my collection out a little bit. So the remaining CDs that I have, because I kept all the ones that I thought were any good, specifically like Wolfenstein 3D, I still got my Quakes. I still have those, that kind of thing. But yeah, and just in case, something might happen one day, I don't have those anymore. That's something I want to get recorded. And then we come to the final game in the list, which was a game that had its own phase in my life. This is ZZT. And the category it gives it is editor construction. Top down. ZZT was a game with ASCII graphics that was the very first game from Epic Mega Games. Tim Sweeney made this game. Tim Sweeney of, the Epic Store fame. This is when this guy was a rock star, man. So the name ZZT doesn't stand for anything, but he named it that on purpose so that it would show up last on any list of alphabetical order games, just like this one. And sure enough, there it is. It's last. Little top-down ASCII shooting game. You play this little face. You hold shift and press an arrow to shoot a bullet. But there's a little simple level editor where you can build stuff, multiple screens, and chain them together. And in the level editor, you can lay down objects, and there is an object-oriented programming language built into it, which will allow you to assign any sort of behavior really you can program that you can think of. So consequently, there was quite a large number of very interesting ZZT games that you can just go download and play. I was heavily into the ZZT scene because there was one back in about 2005. That is a game that does not look like much. It really doesn't. But it will forever be worth going to check out. It is now freeware. So you can go... This is one you can legally go to like an abandonware site and pick up. And it has all of the episodes, because that's how they used to sell games. 1 episode for free, and then 3 episodes, whatever. Go get ZZT and just give it a shot if you haven't played it. 1991 is when this came out, and it feels like a 1991 game. It's weird to see a game this rough and realize that like Wolfenstein 3D was going to come out the very next year, and Wing Commander had come out the year before. But that was it. That was it. The technology, how shall we say it? Technology was all over the place. You could see a game like this that looked not not much and be awesome, and you could compare it to games that looked really great and ended up being doo-doo butter. And that was a common thing. Yeah, and that's the last game in the list, so those are worthwhile games to check out. I think if I were to pick anything, I mean, if you were to go get, if you were to go get DOSBox today, never done DOS before, and you're looking for some fun games to play, just a real quick couple that I would recommend. I would recommend Panzer General. That's a good like strategy, like beer and pretzels kind of strategy game. I would recommend the Death Rally shareware game, because even though it's shareware, it's fun and you can still find that. I would recommend the racing game. I would recommend ZZT, of course, because that is still worth playing to this day. I would recommend Wacky Wheels, because that's a good quick game that you can play, and then all of those being like fun games you can play for a while. Then on top of that, I would put one beefy, like engrossing RPG that's really deep, like maybe NetHack or Rogue or like the original Heroes of Might and Magic or something like that. All awesome games to get started with. Oh yeah, Epic Pinball was always on my list to always have available. Whenever I did an MS-DOS implementation, Epic Pinball was always on it. It was like one of the first things I got. Epic Pinball, Pinball Construction Set, which is not on this list, Rogue, and a game called Beast that my dad had. Not a good game, just a game I like because my dad had it. And yeah, that's a brief summary of MS-DOS and what's there to find. Lots of good stuff here. Writing is really bad, but this is a great infographic. So thanks to Hemrock for sending that my way so we could dig into it on the show. Alright, so we got an email from Hemrock to open up the fail bag, and he sent it with a couple of attachments. One of them is a chiptune. So before we actually read his email, hang on. Let's actually check the chiptune out. So this is J. Keem, and the song is Every. You're listening to TCR. Stick with us. Hemrock writes, Hey, Paisan. Thank you as usual for another episode of TCR. I hope you and the family are staying safe. Excuse me. I'm currently trying to weather out the snowpocalypse that has hit my area. I lived in South Texas off and on for over 12 years, and I've never seen so much snow down here. In any case, I got an unexpected day off work, so here I am writing you. Thank you for sending that chiptune track my way. I'm still working on my top 20 8-bit collective compilation. It may turn out to be a top 30. There were so many good tunes. I'm largely going in alphabetical order, and I have made it only to the Fs. I've attached a track to this email. Let me know what you think. Now that's the one, quick break from the email, that's the one we just heard, and sounds very C64 to me. That sounds very SID sound chip in a good way. I really dug it. Let's get back to the email. You said recently the N64 era was the perfect time for Star Tropics. Just imagine how the world would have been different if instead of Ness in Smash Bros, they would have had Mike from Star Tropics. They could have kept the same moveset. They both have yo-yos. Here's some retro gaming news. Zanuck, the famous shmup, has been released on the Switch for $5. Thundercross, another shmup produced by Konami resembling Gradius, has also hit the Switch for $7. Turrican Flashback on the PS4 and Switch is a $30 compilation of the Turrican games, to include the Amiga versions of Turrican 1 and 2, Super Turrican for the SNES, and Mega Turrican for the Mega Drive, aka Genesis. 4. Blazing Rangers is a new Famicom game that you can purchase in physical form for €55. They also offer the North American tape for the same price. I may as well mention that this company sells a Mega Man clone called Blue. Hack-A-Match is a new NES puzzle game on Indiegogo, and it's already met its goal to provide either digital or physical copies. The physical copy is pretty reasonably priced at $40. That is really reasonably priced for a new, like, retro-style game. They're usually way more expensive than that. Sonic is coming to the world of Legos. Love our Sonic news. And for your brand new C64, you can purchase this brand new C64 game entitled Tiny Quest. Now you're hitting my vein of interest. Let's take a look at Tiny Quest. And sure enough, the link goes to Indie Retro News, which is an awesome site. A lot of old computing games being created. So the question is this something... It looks like a side-scrolling game, but I'm curious if they're selling a Commodore 64 game now. What does that mean? Does that mean you're going to buy a cartridge? Does that mean a floppy disk? Or does that mean something that I can download and play on my C64 emulator? Give me 1 second because I want to check it out here. Okay, it looks like there's no soft copy, but the hard copies are a little bit less expensive than like a brand new Genesis game or a brand new Super Nintendo game or something like that. Tiny Quest, you can get the disc edition for €25, and the tape edition, because remember the C64 had a cassette drive as well. You can get the cassette edition of Tiny Quest for €10, which is awesome because they not just that this game is for sale for you can get it cheaper, but I love it that they're producing cassette games. I absolutely love that. And this site that sells it, it looks like they have a bunch. Space Monsters Meet the Hardy, what is that? Coco and the Time Machine, CPC Soccer, Magenta Gym. These are all cassette-based games for retro PC. I almost said Commodore 64. That isn't true across the board. Tiny Quest is Commodore 64, but it looks like Spectrum. A couple of them are Spectrum games. There's an MS-DOS box set. This is a really great site, dude. Bitmap Soft. I'm gonna have to check this out. That's super cool, man. A site like this that sells these old games at like a reasonable price, like $10 for a cassette copy of a brand new game, is really, really good. Like, that's like... I would pony up, $60 or $70 or whatever it is for a cassette drive based on that, with games that were actually being made that are attainable. That is really cool. Here I am zeroing in on probably the oldest, least cool of all of the retro news. A lot of stuff for the Switch in this news bulletin. A lot of shmups coming out for the Switch. Never took the dive. I couldn't do it. They want the Switch in my house, man. They want it. My kids want it. But there being no way to put the the portable version, there being no way to play that on the TV, and the actual version being $100 more, couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Maybe in another year. We'll see. How's the C64 treating you? Are you still sticking with the pack-in games? As you probably gathered, I like myself some good old-fashioned top 10 lists. What are your top 10, or top 5 if you prefer, games on the C64 Mini? Still playing the C64 Mini? Let me pause it here so I can scratch down a quick top list. Okay, so here's my top 5. Top 5 games on the C64 Mini. Number 5 is California Games. I loved California Games on the NES, and this is very, very close to the original NES version of California Games. There's a couple of changes to the mechanics, which makes me think that a couple of the events, specifically how the BMX event works, like maybe the way they did it on the NES was not the way it was intended to be. Particularly in this game, you can only jump on your bike if you're pulling back on it. You might remember in the NES game, if you were playing the BMX edition, you could just tap that A button, do tiny little bunny hops, and get thousands and thousands of points. As long as you have the patience to do so. Can't do it in this one. So California Games is number 5. Number 4, Temple of Asphi, which is like plays like a Rogue clone. There are a couple of console Rogue clones. Think like a Commodore 64 version of Fatal Labyrinth, the Genesis game. Number 3 is Cosmic Causeway Trailblazer 2, which is basically a 3D plane, and you play as a little rolly ball, and you gotta run, roll, and jump and stuff. Very, very primitive 3D rendering, or something that resembles 3D rendering on the Commodore 64. Worthwhile game if you don't mind quick games. Number 2 is Jumpman, which the Jumpman games made their return to the Ouya, and I don't think I ever picked them up. I can't remember if I bought Jumpman or not on the Ouya, but I remember Jumpman being a thing. So Jumpman is a good one. And then the number 1 game for the C64 Mini is, of course, Impossible Mission. That's my beefy game that I can sink my teeth into. Different every time you play. It's a lot of exploring involved, a lot of frustration, a lot of RNG. You never know if you're going to get a good lab or not. It's the platforming is fun. The sound bites are entertaining. And I always, every time the game starts with stay a while, stay forever, I always let's all sing along with the line, that kind of thing. It's a great game. I really enjoy it. That's one of the Commodore 64 games that is worth going back to play, even if you're not a C64 fan. Play it somehow. It's available on many different systems. You don't have to play the C64 version. Heck, I found it on the Wii. I was able to get Impossible Mission on the Wii for $2.99 or whatever it was. That is a good game. Honorable mentions are Chips Challenge, which didn't make the list because it's still just Chips Challenge. Graphics are even more primitive because it's the C64, but for some reason I find it entertaining and actually spend some time with it. And then Jumpman 2 and Impossible Mission 2. Both are on the honorable mentions list and not on the top list because they look super dope, but I haven't actually sat down with them yet. And that's my list of games that are strictly just the pack-in games that are on the C64 Mini. Commodore 64 had some really awesome quote-unquote games that were like game toolkits, like Build a Shmup or something like that, that I want to check out. Those were something that I wanted to check out on the last time I bought it. But when I bought a C64 Mini before and it went bad on me, the game that I actually dug when I started playing the emulator on my computer, I think it was called Barbarian. Was that the name of it? Sean, you know the game I'm talking about. It was like a one-on-one barbarian type combat game, and you could swing your axe, and if you swung it just right, you'd cut off your opponent's head. Yeah, I liked that game. The first one was rough around the edges and not great. It was a series of games that apparently got better later, but something about that first one just said it was just charm. All of the embracing the technology limitations of the C64, but still making something awesome, but awesome but severely limited. I think that sentence, that phrase, encompasses this C64 experience as far as I'm concerned. And you can see that playing Barbarian. Not a game you're going to want to play forever. This is a quick, let's do a couple rounds and be done with it. But, oh man. I still have an emulator set up on my computer so that I can go back and play Barbarian every once in a while. The only problem is, loading up the C64 emulator on the computer, they leave in the loading times. Remember that the Commodore 64, in its original incarnation, had pretty severe loading times, especially if you bought a cassette-based game, because you'd have to sit for like 5 minutes while the entire cassette read off its data in real time. You have that on the emulator on the PC, which is one of the things that appeals to me about the Mini, is that the Mini plays much more like, I don't know, like an NES emulator or something like that, where the games just load up instantly. Wasn't like that back in the day. People who actually experienced the C64, there was a lot of frustration. You had to plan out your session of Commodore 64 in order to play this thing. Oop, hang on, that's my cell phone. Big thanks to Hemrock for I think that's the end of the email. Let's double check. I got so wrapped up in that site. There's a little bit more left. I've been playing some Project Gotham Racing 2 on the original Xbox. I'm thinking of diving into some Xbox Morrowind. Have you been playing anything besides your C64? I hope you can get your board game friend on the show one of these days. Yeah, man, Paul, we gotta make it happen. Whatever happened to the retro junk box? I have it. I dropped the ball. I've just been super busy, and there were a couple of things that I let go, and one of them was the C64. One of them was the retro junk box, and another one was our Alpha Centauri game. I just had too many things on my plate, so I had to close the book on a couple of projects. It's here. It's ready to go. Desm even sent me his address so that I can mail it to him. I just haven't done it. But I will do it. I realize that it's hung up because of me, so sorry about that. Keep rolling retro. Hemrock. By the way, I believe it's still your turn in Alpha Centauri. Yes, I will do that. I'll get that done. And then he ends it with hashtag BBNMW, or bring back Monday Night Morrowind. Which, why not? Why not at this point? I'm just having a good time with YouTube. It's not, it's not, I don't have a business plan anymore. Let's do it. Just got to play some Morrowind, I think it really is all. Yeah, man, it's good to hear from you. It's been a couple weeks. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing well, man. All right, over to YouTube to read the comments. We got one from Desm101, 43 minutes and 50 seconds in. He says, I got free space from GOG. It's also great. I need to put some more time into it, and also need to try free space too. Yeah, isn't that just the story of our lives, right? Death Adder writes, I agree. A new hide-and-seek murder game would be amazing. I would love for hide-and-seek with murder to become its own genre of games at some point. I think it would require a massive amount of creativity to be done, however. But enough about Dead by Daylight. And that game is old and for dinosaurs. Let's get to the newest games. Newest of the new games. The Mass Effect Legacy Collection. BioWare is releasing its 15-year-old Mass Effect trilogy now with 10% more graphics in a collection this year. Oh, there's my wife again. Hang on. Where was I? Except it's even better now because they remove all the camera angles showing a lady's sweet tushas in the game. That's right. You'll no longer be forced to look at a cartoon drawing of a beautiful woman named Miranda Lawson's cartoon derriere. I'm trying to keep the language PC for Junior here. Thank you, BioWare. You have made both Mass Effect and myself better. I didn't buy Mass Effect Andromeda, where every woman looked like a former WWF champion, Sergeant Slaughter, and I'm not buying this. I had other reasons for not getting Andromeda, but I remember footage from the game. Everyone looked super deformed in it. That being said, have you played the original trilogy? Mass Effect 1 is on my top 25 games of all time. Thoughts on the series? I played Mass Effect 1 on my laptop before I built this computer. So at the time, my computer was not strong enough to run it. So I played it in potato mode with serious input lag. That way of playing it was not enough to hold my attention. I should go back to play it now. But the thing is, before I actually got my computer built and was able to run it, Mass Effect 3 came out and everyone threw this big hatred party. It was kind of like the turning point for BioWare, where they went from like industry rock stars to like, what? And that caused me to never really go back to the first one. Not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying I was not in a good space to play it, and now I know that it's a series that ended in a bad way. So by the time Andromeda came around, like I remember the silly spaces in outer space thing, but I had already checked out of the series by that time. Not because I had any hatred for it, but just because it just fell to the back burner. There were too many other good things to play. You know what I mean? And that's still the case today. So I wouldn't buy the HD collection, not because of any camera angles they took out or anything like that, but I wouldn't buy it because I have Mass Effect 1 and 2 in Steam already that are, for the vast majority, unplayed. I would just install those and play those, and that's good enough. That's just what I think about it. Somebody would have to buy that trilogy and tell me, hey, it has XYZ awesome feature that makes it worth getting. That's what would rope me in. Good to hear from you, brother. Eric Controller writes, I'm down for some Unreal Tournament. I haven't played it in almost 20 years, so yeah, I'm sure I'll suck hard, but as far as multiplayer games go, that one is too legendary to never play again. By the way, I've heard you name drop Descent a few times now, and it's made me wonder, have you ever heard of Overload? It's made by hold on, let me hit that read more button. It's made by some of the developers who made Descent. Played it a couple years ago, and I gotta say, It really hit my Descent nostalgia button in a good way. Basically, as intended. It felt like a true sequel. Highly recommend you play it if you haven't. I don't know that one. I'll have to dig it up. But yeah, I like Descent. I enjoyed Descent. The first one I played a good bit, and I have like a Master Levels pack for Descent 1 and 2 in my CD-ROM collection. That was one of the CD-ROMs that made the cut when I, dwindled my collection down a little bit. So yeah, I would check that out. Good to hear from you, brother. Hope you're doing well. Just realized I'd been recording for a while and I didn't have the button pressed, so that's awesome. Love that. I think we left off with Eric Controller. Yeah, we just read. Death Adder writes, I've got the NES and Genesis Minis, and they're both extremely based, but sometimes I forget there are retro games beyond the soy-filled Bing Bing Wahoo Tendos and the high-spectrum Sega games. How many C64 games were there? I botched getting a PS1 Mini when those were selling for $30 new. RIP. Now, I responded to him in text, but I'll read it here on the air, too. I had no idea the PS1 Mini ever made it down to $30. I would have bought one for $30. Even with, games removed or whatever, and not having a great library, that'd be fine. I wouldn't have mattered. $30 would have been worth it. So let's address your question about how many games are on the Commodore 64. The Commodore 64 era was different for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was still basically one man, one game for the most part. It wasn't universal off the board, but the industry standard was one person would make a game. Therefore, a company would have several games in progress at a time. On top of that, the licensing fees were not the same as the way the modern console market works. On top of that, there were little construction kits that you could get and then build games for, and then those could be released and thus added to the games count. And on top of that, you had the basement programmer who could program their own game, find a market for it on a local bulletin board system, and those were then added to what we consider the Commodore 64 market. I don't know what the canon number is, so I've opened up Google, and let's ask that question and see what it says. How many games were released on the Commodore 64? Let's see what it says. Oh dear. We do not get a list. Okay. Approximately, this is an amalgamation of a few different links. The Wikipedia article starts with, there are approximately 10,000 commercial software titles made for the Commodore 64. So that's commercial software titles. So that doesn't differentiate games from word processors or utility disks or things like that. Or shareware magazines or something like that. The Wikipedia article for games for the Commodore 64 houses 1,301 titles. So you could say, modernized, that is the surviving canon number. Because there's no way you can count, Johnny P. Computer Fan from Topeka, Kansas. Yeah, maybe he made a game on the Commodore 64 that went around his bulletin board system, but everyone who played it, all of their systems died and it is now gone and no one knows it ever existed. Games like that, you can't really count when you're asking how many games are there for the C64. How many games were there? Maybe that's a different question. But Wikipedia gives us this answer of 1,301. I think there's no way you could have a real number, but that's the number we're being given. And that's also one of the reasons why I like it, because a situation like that leaves a lot to be discovered. It leaves a lot of garbage you got to wade through, but it leaves a lot to be discovered. I mean, head over to that Indie Retro news site. There's still games being developed today. So there was no real end of life, just when they stopped making the hardware. So that, combined with the fact that we have working Commodore 64 systems that you can buy, I guess it's like one of the most active retro systems, I suppose. You can still buy NES games, but they only happen every once in a while, and they're expensive. I don't know. That's weird to think. Yeah, weird to think. Let's see, I got a couple more here. Desm101 says, nice, that looks like fun. I'm interested in that now. Glad this one worked out better. Yeah, I haven't tried sideloading yet, but that's going to be an important part. I will make an update video to see how that works. Now, I remember from when I had one before, out of the box, I can sideload one game at a time. And then if I want to play something else, I've got to sideload another game at a time, and that unloads the first game. That's the way it was, released. But then there was a firmware update that fixed it. The problem is the C64 Mini is not an internet friendly device. So I have to go get like a firmware patch, put it on a USB drive, update the firmware that way. Frankly, that makes me a little nervous because I tried that with the last machine and it was just like falling over broken. And I'm wondering if that's going to break my system. So I have to try it while it's still within the warranty window, because that I was able to return my first system. So hopefully, if that reduces the performance to an unacceptable point, then I can just return this one as well. So we'll see. Kaisercade says, yay! Always good to hear from Kaisercade. Maximum RD. Rob, old scenester, writes, glad you got a working one. Have fun. Good to hear from you, man. We got a few comments from Dorobko watching my meme videos, and I like my meme videos that we're going to skip over, but glad you enjoyed that nonsense. Playing Akari Warriors 2. Mecha Menace writes, did you ever experiment with any of the shaders and filters in RetroArch? Akari Warriors 2 on the NES is not a good game. It feels like a developer trying to get its bearing on a new platform. Very amateurish. Maybe SNK put the Z team in charge. The first Akari port fares better, but not by much. I never played Akari 3, so maybe they turned things around by then. Third time's the charm. We had an Errol's near us too. I didn't know it was a chain, he says. Akari Warriors is weird, man, because I played Akari Warriors 3 on that series, like that Steam sells, and it's really good. At least I can say it is a competently made game. So, like it or not, people have their gripes with that game. It's not like Akari Warriors 2, where everything's just a mess. When we first played Akari Warriors 2, my older brother used a phrase that sticks with me. He said, "This is a dud game." And it's a weird concept to think of that situation. You look at the picture on the cover, you look at the title, you look at what we have to go on, and you decide, I'm going to get this game, and you bring it home, and it's just a total flop. That is a dud scenario. You don't really have that anymore. You got those awful games, yes, but now we kind of see them coming a mile away. So, I don't know. SNK was a good company. I don't know how they got into that scenario. Maybe they outsourced it. Who knows? I don't know. And then Gaming Beast, Sean writes on my Let's Play Ruined by 2-year-old video, man, this has been so long ago. It really has. That video was, when did that one come out? Hold on a second, I'm loading it up now. I don't feel like digging for the date. And then goofing around in my car, he writes, Glare Witch Project, I'll get my coat. It's pretty funny. I think everything had stopped at that point, and I wasn't really making any content. I was trying to find a way to make content without any real time to do so. I thought it'd be cool to be able to do videos in my car, set the camera up and turn the light on and just do a little van cast for a bit, but you couldn't see anything, so there's no way I could make a video that way. That there was my screen test, and it's just as close as I got. How are we doing on time now? I think that is the entirety of the fail bag, and we just crossed the hour mark at 1 hour and 6 minutes. Well, listen, I can't do the normal way I wrap the show because I've been trying all day to get this released, and at this point, it just needs to get done. But that's TCR for the week. Thanks so much for listening and hanging out, and I'll see you next Wednesday.